All right, cool. I'm gonna start off by sharing my screen with the homework from last week. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Okay, so for those of you who were able to complete this, if not, you should be able to just follow along. I know the answers are down below, but what questions did you guys have as you were going through it? I guess, what did you guys get? I know this one might have been a little tricky. What did you guys get for this one?
No, you can't.
Let me try to see. Sachi, you said you were at the session. Did you get something for D for the homework?
Not really.
Yeah, that's cool. You can take a guess whether it's a polynomial at first, and then we can go over what the answer is. Because I know that one looks a little tricky. So just, you get a 50-50 shot, yes or no?
I think no.
Okay, cool. So that's actually correct, I believe. Because polynomials, you guys probably went over this in your last session, but they're expressions that can be separated by plus and minus signs, right? So in this case, this part would be a polynomial because it's separated by plus signs only. But then you got this guy over here dividing by xy. That's what makes it not a polynomial, right? So at that point, it's not just plus or minus anymore because you got a division in there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Awesome. Another one that might be kind of tricky is this one, because you see the to the 1/2 here, and you don't really know what to do about that, right? So do you guys think this is a polynomial?
No.
No.
No. It is not a polynomial.
Okay. I think it actually is, because you see it's only separated by plus and minus signs, right? There's not like a multiplier somewhere along the way, but I could be wrong. We will figure that out.
The exponent is like a fraction, so that can't be a polynomial.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, that completely makes sense. Okay, let's see. You guys, everyone gets the difference between what's a function, what's not a function.
Yeah.
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 Do you want to try to explain what the vertical line test is? Yash, you can give that a shot.
All right. So like the vertical line test is like on a graph. Like if you graph like a linear equation, like once you put like a vertical line through a point, like it should not cross twice.
Yeah.
Not cross 2 points.
That's completely right. And the linear equations that we'll be working with today, everything except for like literally a completely vertical line is going to pass the vertical line test with what we're doing today. So yeah, but with other functions, you're going to have to use the vertical line test to see whether or not it works. So yeah, feel free to put any other questions you have in the chat. I think that's about it for the homework. The main takeaways from last week is just what is a polynomial, and then what is the function. So that's just your really basic things that you got to know for algebra. So yeah, let's go into today's lesson. Amy, you can share your screen.
So like Sherry said, today's lesson is going to be on linear equations and inequalities. So this is your basic linear equation. It's in slope-intercept form. So you have your y and then the equal sign. So the equal sign is pretty important because that's what makes this expression an equation and not an inequality. And then you have your mx. So m is your slope. You can find it on the graph by dividing your rise over your run and then adding your y-intercept.
I know one thing that might be a little confusing is that there's like 4 letters here, and which ones do you guys think are the actual variables?
Y and X.
Yes. And can you explain why that is? Why that is? So why wouldn't m be a variable in this scenario?
I'm not sure.
Okay, so you see how m is the slope here?
Yeah.
So m, when you actually write out your equation, it's not a variable, it's called a constant. So it's literally just a number. So like one equation you could have like, hold on, y equals 5x plus 3. So in this case, like the only variables that are left are y and x. The 5 and the 3, those are just numbers. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Awesome. So to just reiterate, with this equation here, what would be our slope? Feel free to answer in the chat or just out loud.
Wait, what was the question again?
What is the slope of the line that I wrote out here?
Y equals. You didn't write anything.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't see anything.
Oh, okay.
I think it's like the screen share. Do you want me to stop sharing my screen?
I see it now.
Okay.
I see it now.
Oh, I wrote it in blue, sorry.
Okay.
You can't really see it that well. But what would be the slope of that equation?
5.
Yes. And would that line be steeper or less steep than if it were 1? This might be jumping ahead a little bit, but just to get y'all thinking.
It would be more steep.
Yes. Okay, cool. And then what would the y-intercept be?
3.
So would it intersect the y-axis above 0 or below 0?
Above
Above.
0.
Yep. Okay, cool.
Above.
Let's move on.
Above.
So this is your basic linear equation problem. So I hope you guys can all see the graph. You can see the 2 points, -6, 0, and 0, 2. So I want you guys to be able to find the linear equation of this graph.
So let's take around, we'll take 2 minutes. You guys can pull up like a pencil and a paper and find the equation of this graph. Does anyone have any questions about how to find slope? If so, we can walk through that too.
No, I know.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so don't tell us the answer yet. Just figure out the equation of this line real quick. You guys can give me a thumbs up when you're done. Yeah, thanks. You should be able to go to the reactions and do a thumbs up. That's just something cool about Zoom. But yeah, okay, cool. So let's try to go over this. Amy, do you want to go over how to solve this problem?
Sure. So going back to the linear equation form, the slope-intercept form, sorry, we have to find our n first, right? Our slope. So our slope is always rise over run. So if you can see from the 0, 0 point, our y-intercept is at 0, 2, and then our x-intercept is at negative 6, 0. So our rise from 0 to 2 is a positive 2, and then our run is from negative 6 to 0, but we're finding distance, so distance is always a positive number, so it would be 2 out of 6, so it's 1/3. That's our slope. And then to find our b, which is our y-intercept, we have to go to 0, 2, and then it's just positive 2. So our answer would be y equals 1/3 x plus 2.
Does anyone have any questions about how we got that? Awesome. So this is the standard form of an equation. It's literally just another way of writing the equation. And one thing that is really helpful about standard form, with standard form, the variables that are actually variables are x and y. Everything else is going to be constant numbers. And the one thing that's really helpful about standard form is that you can easily find the x-intercept and the y-intercept. I know with the slope-intercept form, it was really easy to find the y-intercept because it was literally your b over there. But it might be a little bit harder to find the x-intercept. You would have to do some arithmetic. But here, which one would you set to 0 to find the y-intercept? Would you set x equal to 0 or y equal to 0 to find the y-intercept? Take a shot at it. You have a 50-50 chance.
X.
Yeah. I don't know who answered that, but do you want to kind of explain your reasoning behind that?
Oh, okay. So the y-intercept, the coordinates of a y-intercept, x is always 0 and y has like a value.
Yeah, that's right. So if you kind of like draw your basic coordinate plane here, if you're trying to find, can you guys see what I'm drawing?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool. If you're trying to find like your y-intercept here, it might be like that point. And no matter where the y-intercept is along this line, the x is always going to be 0. So that's why you're absolutely right. You would set the x equal to 0. And then obviously, if you want to find the y-intercept, you would just set the x equal to 0. So that's what's pretty neat about this form. Other than that, it's literally just another way to write an equation. It's not that deep. And that's really what I can think of is helpful about this form.
So now we're just going to convert between the two forms. So convert this standard form equation to slope-intercept form.
Let's take a couple minutes to do that and then give me a thumbs up when you're done.
Wait, I didn't really get how you said x was equal to 0.
Oh yeah, that was for something else. That's to find the x-intercept and the y-intercept. So in order to convert an equation in standard form to slope-intercept form, you actually don't have to set anything to 0. All you have to do is move around parts. So we can work it out in couple minutes. Give it a shot. Literally just move around like x's and y's, divide by some stuff, and see if you can get it into the form y equals mx plus b. I help a little bit.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
We'll go over it in a couple of seconds here. And then after that, if you guys are done with that part, find the x-intercept and y-intercept of this equation also. Just go above and beyond. Okay, cool. That should have given y'all some time to think about it. If you didn't get it, it's cool. We'll go over it now. So I guess this might be helpful if I just like wrote it out here. So the whole point of slope-intercept is that y is by itself, right? So the first thing when I look at this, what I got to do is get y by itself. So what would I do? What would my first step be?
Divide 4.
Yeah, so that would work. You would get there, but I usually like to subtract before I divide. It's basically the same thing. You could either subtract or divide first. And then now, if I decided to subtract first, what would I do now? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you guys got to? Did anyone also get this answer?
No,
Okay, cool. What did you get?
nothing.
Oh no, that's okay. Do you understand how we got to y equals mx plus b?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask a couple questions. What's the slope of this line?
-5/4.
Yep. And is that going up or going down?
Going down.
Yep.
Going down.
Cool. And then what's the y-intercept of this line?
1/4.
1/4.
Yeah, 1/4.
And then this is something that you probably want to use this form, the standard form for, but what's the x-intercept?
Wait, is that 5?
Close. So remember what I think Rahul said? The x-intercept is when we set the y equal to 0. So we would set the y equal to 0. And then once we do that, we would get 5x equals 1. And from there, you know the answer, right?
Oh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So you see how like it's easier for you to get the x-intercept with standard form?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can see here how you can double check your answer to make sure you're right if you have access to Desmos or just another graphing calculator. So you can see that right here we have our equation in standard form, and then we have the same equation but in slope-intercept form that we converted. And if you graph them on top of each other, they should be able to, like, you should only see one line. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and say you had accidentally like added instead of subtracted, you would get a really weird line that doesn't match your original line, which means that you went wrong somewhere.
Mhm. So now we're going to apply to what we know. We're going to apply what we know already about linear equations and apply that to word problems. So I'll just read it out loud. Anne took a taxi home from the airport. the taxi fare was $2.10 per mile, and she gave the driver a tip of $5 and paid a total of $49.10. Write an equation to determine the distance in miles, x, between the airport and Anne's home. So after we find the equation, we'll have to find the actual distance between the airport and Anne's home.
So what's helpful for this is to first write an equation in the form y equals mx plus b, where y is your total money paid and x is your miles. So don't even look at like how much money she paid yet. Just write an equation and let me know when you guys are done with that. Does anyone have an answer? So I guess, are you guys confused at all about what our equation should be? Or do we have an answer?
I'm confused what the equation should be.
Okay, cool. Let's go over it then. So in order to write the equation, we already know the two parts that we need, right? We need our m and our the y and x, they're just going to be y and x. They're not going to change. So m, we know represents the slope. And the slope is always rise over run. But the slope can kind of be hard to identify in the actual problem. So we know that the fare was $2.10 per mile. And we know that the tip is $5. So the slope, an easy way to like figure out which one's your slope is that the slope is going to be something divided by something, right? And this number right here is money divided by miles. So do you see how it's like something per something?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so the thing that's like something per something is going to be your slope. And then the other number is your y-intercept. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the total, we're not going to use that when we're writing the equation. That's just what we're going to plug in at the end for this part. So
you can also look at it about how like the $2.10 per mile, that's the number right in front of your variable. And if x is one of your variables, then $2.10 should be your slope.
Yeah, so like every
sense, yeah.
x in this equation represents your miles, right? So every time you drive another mile, you have to pay $2.10. So it seems like pretty obvious that you're going to have to multiply $2.10 by the number of miles that you're going. It just kind of makes sense if that's how much it charges per mile. So yeah. So the final equation, you guys probably figured this out, would be 2.1x plus 5. And from there, all we have to do is plug in the total money that she paid, which is $49.10. And I haven't done that math yet, but I'm sure you guys would get. Do we have the answer for this on the next page?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, cool. Yeah, yeah.
Does everybody understand how we got there?
Yes.
Awesome.
Oh, wait. Okay, wait, yeah, I got it. Never mind.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
So this is our next word problem. The perimeter of a rectangle is 34 units. Its width is 6.5 units. Write an equation to determine the length L of the rectangle. And then after we write the equation, we should be able to use it to find the length of the rectangle.
Yeah, so this problem is probably super helpful to draw it out. So I'm just going to draw a rectangle for you guys to visualize. And then take a couple minutes to figure this one out. Does anyone have an answer for the equation and wants to share it?
Or does anybody have any ideas to write the equation?
Sasha, do you have any ideas for where to start with this problem?
I think
Yeah, go for it.
I did 34 minus 6.5 times 2.
Yeah, so that's a really great expression. And that would definitely get you the, that's definitely a start to getting you the answer. But with like plugging in all the numbers, for me at least, sometimes it gets a little confusing, like where what number goes where. And instead, that's where our variable L comes in. So let's kind of approach it a slightly different way rather than just like plugging in numbers. What's the perimeter? Well, we're still plugging in numbers, but just a little bit more put together. What's the formula for the perimeter of a rectangle?
You add up all of the side lengths.
Yeah, so in this case, we named this side length W and this side length L, right? So it would be W plus this L plus this W plus this L. Do you get how that works?
Yes.
Cool. And then how can you simplify that? Just that, right?
Yeah.
And then from there, you can see how we would get the answer. So the perimeter, the problem gave us that, right? We can just plug in 34 for that. And then W, what's W?
$6.5.
Yep. Plus 2L. So that would be our final equation, and that's the answer right there. So just like starting with the general formula for the perimeter makes it a little easier. You get the same answer if you just like think about it, but it's just another way to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously you can move stuff over and find the answer to that. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Okay, so this is your basic inequality equation. So you have your y, which we also had in our slope-intercept form. So y is less than mx plus b. So your m is still your slope and your b is still your y-intercept. And the inequality symbol is really important because that's what makes this expression an inequality and not an equation.
So to like think about what this means real quick. For the equation, we were graphing a line, right? So for the inequality, what do you guys think we're graphing? You can start with kind of a coordinate plane. So for an inequality, for a line, we're graphing that, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then for an inequality, we can't just graph the line again, right? So what would change? We would graph, you guys probably figured this out, but we would graph everything below the line or above the line potentially. So all of the points in the shaded area would satisfy the inequality. And you guys can like pick a random inequality, start plugging in numbers, and you can see the numbers that work always end up being like a region, not just a line.
And then the less than or equals to symbol just basically means that the y value is less than or equal to like the mx plus b part. And then the greater than or equal to sign means the opposite. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. So for this problem, let's simplify this inequality to find x. So I'll give you guys a couple minutes to try to find that.
And then a couple of things to remember with inequalities is whenever you divide by a negative number, that is a terrible way of writing that, but you always
We
got to
switch the
switch the
sign.
sign. Yeah. I don't think that even happens here, but just so you know.
Wait, do we switch the sign when we divide as well?
Only by a negative number.
Okay.
All right, okay.
And that's just because once you plug in a couple numbers, you kind of see if you didn't switch the sign, you would end up changing the original inequality. Does anyone have an idea or an answer for this question?
Wait, the answer?
If you have it.
X is less than negative 1/2.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Great. And then have you guys seen like this notation of expressing inequalities before?
Yes.
Yeah, it's just on a number line. And then really the only thing you kind of have to understand is that the circle, if it's open, that's the less than. And if it's filled in, that would be less than or equal to. Other than that, it's just a number line. You point in the direction you want. And yeah, y'all can try this one. You're just gonna have to, this one you're actually gonna have to use the switch the sign things. Shout it out when you have an answer.
X is greater than -40.
Yeah.
So just, is everybody like finished trying it?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to solve this, we would multiply both sides by 3. And then we would get -2x plus 4 is less than 84. Less than 84. And then subtract 4 from both sides. And then we would get -2x is less than 80. And then divide both sides by -2. And then we would get x is greater than -40.
So basically you just solve a normal equation, but you remember to switch the sign whenever you divide by.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone have any questions about that? Cool.
So for this one, we have like an inequality, but it's just like a really complicated quadratic. And then, so basically the problem gives you a couple of points to try, and then you can try to find out which ones are solutions to this inequality.
And plugging in points is going to come really helpful when you're graphing these inequalities. So it's not that hard, but really you just got to remember to keep your math straight.
Does everybody understand how to do this?
Yeah.
So we would just plug each one in. So if we just plug in 0, so 3 times 0 squared is 0, plus 3 times 0 is another 0, and then -2. So then -2 is greater than or equal to -2 over here. So that's a solution. And you would just keep on doing this for every single point. But like if you had a graph, you could always just like graph each point onto the quadratic, like on the graph you have. So then like 0, -2 would be right here. So it's exactly on the quadratic. So you would know that that's solution.
And then when you're graphing these, another thing to note, this might come later, but if it's less than or equal to, remember on like the number line, we like shaded in the dot. When you're graphing like a line, you would just graph a solid line, and then if it's just like greater than, you would do like a dotted line.
Geometry, don't we do like the dashed line and then we find the shape?
Yeah. You would just use a dashed line if it's like greater than.
Yeah.
And then if it's greater than or equal to, you would shade it or make a solid line.
So here's another inequality that you guys can try.
All right, cool. What'd you guys get for this one?
I got x is less than 30 over 11.
You also have to remember that like the variable in this equation is p, not x.
Oh, I mean p.
Yeah.
P is less than 30.
Yeah. You're good. That's something that's like really annoying that might cost you like small points on a quiz or something.
Yeah.
Let's see if that answer is right.
Okay. So this is the long process of doing it. So you have negative 7p minus 4 is greater than 26p minus 94. And then you add 4 to both sides. And then you have, okay. And then negative 33p is greater than negative 90. And then multiply both sides by negative 1 and then divided by 33.
So yeah, great job.
Does everybody understand this?
Yeah. I just added 7p though.
Yeah,
Oh,
that works too.
Mhm. That works.
As long as you're moving it around and not changing the inequality, you'll get the right answer.
So here's another word problem. You downloaded a video game to your computer. Sorry. Okay. You downloaded a video game to your computer. You have a 60-minute free trial of the game. It takes 5 1/6 minutes to set up the game and 7 1/3 minutes to play each level. You want to find out how many levels you can play for free. Write an inequality that describes the number of levels X you can play in 60 minutes. And then after we find the inequality, we want to solve the question, can you play 6 levels during your free trial?
So let's just work through this one together. So for the 5 1/6, is that a rate or is that a fixed number?
Fixed number.
Yep. because she's just setting it up at the beginning and then she doesn't have to do anything else with it. So that's going to be our B in the case of equations, and then like still B in the case of inequalities. In other words, we're not multiplying that by x. And then for the 7 1/3, that would be a rate, right? And then it would be our slope. It would be the amount of minutes it takes for each level. So yeah, and then the only thing left is to decide which side your inequality is going to be on. So in this question, it's kind of unclear whether 60 would be okay. I think it would, so it would be less than or equal to. But usually they're a little bit more clear. It'll be like less than 60. So just to go over it, it would end up being, or wait. Or in this case, y is just 60. And then you would solve that.
To find if you could plug in 6 for your x or your L, depending on what variable you use.
Wait, I have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
How did you get 7 1/3 for this
Yeah, so 7 1/3, you see it says it takes 7 1/3 minutes to play each level. So that means for each level that we play, the time's going to go up by 7 1/3 minutes. So to find our total time, we're going to end up having to multiply the number of levels we play by 7 1/3. So that's why we're multiplying it with x. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So really, how to go approach these problems is you're usually going to have 3 numbers. One's the total. That's usually pretty easy to figure out. It's just like the total amount of time you have. And then one of them is going to be fixed. It's not going to change. And then one of them you're going to have to multiply by your variable.
So the answer is yes, you can play 6 levels during your free trial, and you would just go about this plugging in 6 as your L. And then if you plugged in 6 as your L and if the equation worked, then you know that you can play 6 levels during your free trial. Does that make sense?
And that's just a little bit easier than, you could also solve the inequality for L and see if that works for 6, but just plugging in 6 is a little bit easier on the math.
So looking at this graph, what points are solutions to this system of equations? You could just like yell them out or something. You don't need to write them down.
Oh, and real quick, for graphing an inequality, do you guys know how to determine which way you shade an inequality? So this one's obviously already graphed, but if it weren't graphed, how do you know that we have to shade in the middle rather than around it? Does that make sense? You guys can guess for this. So why did we decide to shade in here for the inequality? All right, so there's a couple reasons, 2 reasons really, and they both explain it fine. One is that when it's written in the form y equals something, all you have to do is look at what side the inequality is pointing at. So in this case, it's greater than, So it's just going to be above inequality. That's like pretty straightforward. And if it were less than, it would be below. But a lot of the times your inequalities are written in like weird forms where it's not everything's on the same side. And in that case, what's really helpful is just like plugging in points and see if it would work. So in this case, if you plugged in 0, 0, which is everyone's favorite point to plug in, you would get 0 is greater than -1, which is true. So you would shade in the direction of 0, 0. Does that make sense? All right, cool. We can go back to the question, what points are the solutions?
So this is another one where you could, like, if you had the equations, like the algebraic equations, you could just plug it in. Or if you could just, you can also, if you have access to the graph of the system, you can just map the points out and check if they map on correctly. So you can see like 0, 0 is a solution because it maps out onto both, like both the blue and the red. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Today we learned about linear equations and inequalities, how to graph them, how to solve word problems with them. And then next week, we're going to be talking about what happens when we have more than one equation and solving those, which is kind of annoying, but also really useful. So does anyone have questions about anything that we covered today? Graphing, the word problems, the equations themselves.
So are all the things we just learned today in this class, is it gonna be on home? Is it gonna, like, are we gonna have homework on the same thing?
Yeah, it's just going to be a quick worksheet, and it's on the slides, and also it's going to be posted on Google Classroom. It should take 10 to 20 minutes.
Okay.
Is our tutoring sessions always going to be on Tuesday?
Yeah, the algebra sessions are going to be Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Sorry.
Yeah, weekly.
Okay.
With that, I guess one thing that, just going back to like the equations, another problem that you'll see a lot, just with like the couple of minutes that we have left, is you'll be given like a slope and a point, and you'll have to find an equation with that. I don't know if we did that problem specifically. Do you have like a blank slide I could kind of write on?
No, but I can add one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So a problem that a lot of the times you'll get is what is the equation of a line that goes through 2, -3 and has a slope of 4?
We can't see it.
What about now?
All right, yeah, I can see it.
Okay, cool. And then that's one problem. And then a lot of the times something that's useful is has a slope parallel yes, very useful, parallel to y equals 2x plus 3. And then another thing you'll see, sorry, I'm kind of like spitting in things last minute, but perpendicular to y equals 2x plus 3. So let's just go through these 3 topics real quick, and then we'll be all set. So I guess there's like a special form called slope-intercept or point-slope form, I think. But the form doesn't make a lot of sense to memorize unless you actually know where it comes from, which is pretty easy, and you guys already know how to figure it out. It really just comes from the slope formula. So can anyone tell me the formula for slope?
Y equals mx plus b.
Not slope-intercept form, like literally the how to calculate slope. M equals what?
Like, how do you find it on a graph, especially if you have a graph?
I know it's rise over run, but what's like the way with y's and x's?
Oh,
Y2
y2 minus
y1.
y1.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, y1 minus. Yeah.
No,
y2 minus y1
by x2
over
plus
x2 minus x1.
Yep. So that's your equation for slope. And we're gonna kind of plug in numbers basically for this to figure out our equation. So given the equation over here, what's our m gonna be?
Slope.
4, yeah. And we can't really find, like, it's kind of hard to think about because we only have 1 point. So you're like, okay, what am I supposed to do with only 1 point? But the thing is, you really only need 1 point here. And this is what I mean by that. So the first point is 2, -3. And the second point can be literally any point on the line. And what that means is we just make it xy. So how would you find the slope between 2, -3 and xy? We would just kind of plug in the points, right? Thank you for your artwork. It would just be y minus -3 over x minus 2. Oh no. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Awesome. So one of our points, we just took the point xy and the point 2, -3, and we kind of plugged them in for slope. And then at this point, we have all the information we need to make a line. So all you kind of have to do is multiply the bottom part over. Or you kind of just simplify this. Hold on, let me try to erase some stuff. Okay, so really you just multiply it over. You get 4 times x minus 2 equals y plus 3. Does that make sense? And then from there, you guys know how to multiply that out and make it into slope-intercept. But really the takeaway from this, after that, it's just algebra, which I guess is kind of the point. But really the takeaway from this is to take your slope equation, like you're literally how to find a slope equation, and then plug in your 1 point and then plug in xy. And you could also memorize the point slope form or whatever, but I find it really helpful just to start with your equation for slope and go from there. And then last 2 things, I know we're out of time, but for what is parallel to y equals 2x plus 3? Got any guesses?
Y equals 2x plus 5.
Yeah, I haven't worked it out exactly, but basically the slope just needs to be 2, right? Because parallel lines have the same slope. And then perpendicular lines, this isn't as like intuitive. You can't really just think of this, but does anyone happen to know how you would find something that's perpendicular to that line? Yeah, so this might be something new. You're gonna take something called the opposite reciprocal.
Y equals 1/2. X.
Not quite. So yeah, basically, but with a
-3.
negative. And that sounds kind of complicated, but it's really not when you think about it. So say the number was 2. The opposite reciprocal would be -1/2. So you would just put it over 1 and then put a negative in front of it. Does that make sense? And one quick example,
Oh,
what
yeah.
is, sorry. What is the opposite reciprocal of 2/3?
3/2.
Remember the negative part. You might have said it and I just misheard it. But yeah, it'd be -3/2. Okay, cool, awesome. Thank you for coming, everyone. If you have any last minute questions about peer-to-peer or linear equations, I'm here to answer them. I'll be here for a couple minutes. But yeah, thank you for coming. Hope you learned something. And hope you guys are back next week and do the homework. It won't take that long.
Yeah, the homework is posted on Google Classroom, and we have the slides posted there too if anybody wants to look back. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.